All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Kevin Miller. I'm the Director of Research for Independent Sector, and thank you for joining us for Exploring Trust in Nonprofits and Philanthropy. On behalf of Independent Sector, I want to welcome everyone, especially our Independent Sector members, but also anyone else who's joining us. So I want to introduce all of the speakers who are going to be talking with you today. So we have Dr. Akilah Watkins, who's the CEO of Independent Sector. She has over 25 years of experience in the sector, bringing leadership in community development, philanthropy, and equity advocacy. Victor Tolomeo is Vice President at Edelman Data and Intelligence and is a researcher with a lot of experience designing and executing research programs that inform and measure the impact of public policy and issue-based campaigns at the global, national, and local levels. Sabeen Perwaiz is the president and CEO of the Florida Nonprofit Alliance, where she strengthens and advocates for Florida's entire nonprofit sector. And Satonya is the president and CEO of Peak Grantmaking, a membership organization for grant-making professionals. So we're very lucky to have all of these people with us here today. Next, we are going to turn it over to our CEO, Dr. Akilah Watkins, to share a few opening remarks for the moment.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And I'd like to welcome everyone to our Exploring Trust in Nonprofits and Philanthropy webinar. My name is Akilah Watkins, and I'm President and CEO of Independent Sector. We are the national trade organization for the charitable nonprofit sector. We are also a membership organization that we convene, we strengthen, and we advocate for nonprofits and philanthropy and the entire charitable nonprofit sector. And so for today's webinar, we are particularly excited to be talking about trust. We all can feel how important trust is during this time with all of the political upheaval happening. And for us at Independent Sector, we really know that trust is our most important social capital. It is why Americans volunteer. It's why they become donors. It's why they participate in the charitable sector throughout this country. And so we are particularly excited to be looking at our 6th year of measuring trust. And this is a bit of a spoiler alert, so I warn you that nonprofits are still one of the most trusted institutions in this country. And I think that that's something we should be particularly proud of. And so we'll hear a lot more about social trust and why our sector in particular enjoys that and what responsibility comes as a result of that. I would like to say that if you're not a member of Independent Sector, I encourage you all to join as members. Please go to our website and look under our membership tab. And all information is there. And if you haven't signed up to attend our national summit this year, I encourage you all to do so. Registration is now open. Our national summit will happen in Atlanta, October 27th through the 29th. So with that being said, I would now like to introduce our next speaker, to talk to us about this incredible work that we've embarked on, Victor Tolomeo, who will be talking with us today more in depth about the trust survey. So Victor.
Thanks, Akilah. All right. So just a quick note on the methodology. Like Akilah said, this is the 6th year that we've conducted this research. The main instrument is an online quantitative survey of American adults, and this goes back all the way to late 2019, early 2020. We field it every year. The audience is just American adults over the age of 18, and the sample size is 3,000, which makes it, I think, the largest quantitative survey of the American public when it comes to their trust in nonprofits and philanthropy. The survey is nationally representative by race, income, educational attainment, gender, age, region, and urbanicity, which is a fancy way of saying whether you live in an urban, suburban, or rural area. And it was fielded in the first half of April of this year, so a couple months ago. Additionally, we have some insights from some qualitative online focus group discussions that we did. We had two groups, one of sort of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents, and another group of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents, to give us a little bit more detail into sort of the why behind how the public sees trust in nonprofits, and additionally to be able to dig deeper into whether there were partisan differences in the results. So with that, I will jump into the key findings. So first off, the headline is that trust has held steady in nonprofits compared to last year. This is actually a fairly big finding because going back to 2019, like I said, previously, every year that we did this study, we saw an erosion in trust. Every year, trust would drop by 1 or 2 points. Except last year, we actually saw trust rebound a little bit. And then this year, 2025, nonprofits have maintained that rebound. So this is really kind of great news in that the nonprofit sector seems to be bucking the trend that we have all heard about of declining general institution trust in the United States. So trust right now for nonprofits is at 57%. So 57% of Americans say that they trust the nonprofit sector to do what is right. And this is head and shoulders above the other institutions that we tested in this survey. Small businesses are the only one that comes anywhere close at 42%. You can see that private foundations are further down at 38%. Corporate foundations are at 33%. High net worth individual givers are at 29%, which actually for them we have more people distrusting than trusting. And we'll get into that later in the presentation. And then you can see that trust is actually quite low in government, media, and for large corporations. Now, why is this? We wanted to dig a little bit into why nonprofits are, in such a good place, especially considering where most other institutions in America are right now in terms of trust. And we see that nonprofits are seen as both more competent and more ethical than most of these other institutions. You can see on the left of the slide, there are basically 3 institutions that lead the pack in competence and ethics. The military is, I think, unsurprisingly seen as the most competent, followed by small businesses and then nonprofits. And then the numbers sort of fall off from there. Again, the very bottom of the scale, you have government at all levels, media, large businesses. Foundations are somewhat in the middle. And in our qualitative research, we really wanted to understand why this is. So why are nonprofits seen as so much more competent and more ethical compared to these other institutions? And the answer really comes down to there's a perception that the nonprofit sector has to abide by certain standards and that it is held accountable both by the government and by the communities that it serves in a way that, say, government or business or the media are not or not perceived to be. So we have some quotes here from the qualitative research. I'll just call out a couple, interesting nuggets. There is one a gentleman who is a Republican who says that nonprofits at their core are meant to do good in the communities they serve. They must meet standards established by the government. And this was a theme we saw, that there's this perception that there are all sorts of standards, either with the IRS or with other regulations, that sort of are guardrails to make sure that the sector is doing what it should be doing. Additionally, because nonprofits are so associated with operating charities and other similar organizations, there's a perception that the sector in order to operate, just has to, anticipate the community's needs where it operates. And they need to, be showing proof of the work that they're doing in their community. So generally, there's this sense that nonprofits just meet a higher threshold of accountability than other institutions. Additionally, and this was a finding we saw last year for the first time, and again, it's maintained in the data this year, and it's that the public believes that on balance, nonprofits are really working to heal national divisions rather than exacerbate them. You can see on the right of the slide, we asked for each of these institutions, do you think that they're making things better, kind of having no impact on net, or making things worse? And for nonprofits, 44% of the public think that they're making things better. Just 16% think that they're making things worse. And that is head and shoulders better than corporations, the government, and media, where 1 in 4 or less think that those institutions are making things better. Now, for the rest of the presentation, I want to dig into a lot of the insights we had this year, which were new, that we haven't seen before in previous years, about the relationship between the nonprofit sector and the federal government. In general, there's this very strong belief that the nonprofit sector and the federal government, and actually all levels of government, need to be working together to address these issues. So even though they say that the government is making things worse, 69% of respondents said that nonprofits and the government must work together to address societal issues. They can't do this or attempt to do it on their own. It needs to be a joint effort. Additionally, as I mentioned on the previous page, there's this perception that nonprofits are seen as more accountable to their communities than the government. But there's a tension here, because we also see that almost 6 in 10 think that the federal government and the nonprofit sector often have conflicting priorities. That while it's necessary for these institutions to work together, that there can also be these issues of undue influence. And this most comes out when we talk about issues of nonprofit advocacy, and where you start getting into advocacy or operations related to elections, or tangentially related to public policy, anything that could possibly be getting towards the political system. So unsurprisingly, there's a lot of distrust of partisan politics today, and that is coloring the public's perceptions of everything, and the nonprofit sector is included in that. So just 23% of Americans trust nonprofits to avoid partisan politics in their operations. That is quite low, especially considering that when you ask about trust generally, it's 57%. So that's quite a drop when you specify, do you trust them to avoid partisanship? And the reason for this is, as I said, this sense of partisanship, this red-blue divide, it's just infected everything in our society right now. We have one quote. It says, "It's impossible to stay completely neutral." Paraphrasing, everyone is on one side or the other. So there's a real rejection by the public of the idea that anyone can be truly neutral. We heard again and again a phrase that's been used, is that everyone has an agenda. So this is, again, there's kind of tension. The public is very clear that the sector needs to work with government, but working with government often comes with a lot of thorny issues, and can open a lot of issues that the public is maybe not comfortable with. And we tested this explicitly. We said, all right, you previously said that you trust nonprofits, but what if we told you that a significant portion of the money that the nonprofit sector receives comes from government sources. If you knew that, then how much would you trust the nonprofit sector? And trust drops to 38%. So that's an almost 20-point drop when hearing that many nonprofits get a lot of their funding from government sources. And the reasons for this I think, are very related to the environment that we're operating in right now. On the left, you have, just very frankly, you have a lot of distrust of the Trump administration. It should be noted that this study was fielded in early April, which is very soon after President Trump started, getting into it with Harvard and some other universities. And so you have this quote from Democrats saying, "This current administration is interfering everywhere. I wouldn't have expected any undue influence in the past, but now it's a new era." Combine that generally with this general perception that money comes with influence, that there's always strings attached. And additionally, you see this with perceptions of high net worth philanthropy. So I mentioned earlier, we saw in the first slide of the presentation that trust in high net worth individual givers has slightly eroded. It dropped 2 points versus last year, and it's actually underwater. More Americans distrust these individuals than trust them. It's just 29%. And the reason for this is, again, there's this concern about undue influence. So 59% believe that these high net worth individuals who are, funding nonprofits or other causes, they believe that they have too much influence because of the money that they give. Another, almost 6 in 10, 58% agree that high net worth individuals are more focused on their own interests than the public good. There's this perception that, by and large, these individuals, they give to organizations to either burnish their own reputations or to influence organizations for their own purposes, so that they're not doing it for altruistic reasons. And again, I think some of this should be seen in the light of current events. In early April, Elon Musk was still very much in the news, and that was very clearly coming out, especially when you looked at the responses from Democrats, both in the qualitative and the quantitative research. But I think the good news is that despite all of these concerns about undue influence and the relationship between nonprofits and their independence versus the government and from other funders, there is very broad recognition that losing federal funding would negatively impact not just these organizations, but the communities they serve. So you have 68% say that losing federal funding would have a negative impact on local communities. There was very strong agreement on this across the political spectrum, both Republicans, Democrats, independents. Everyone sort of agreed that there are a lot of concerns right now, but again, nonprofits and the government, they need to go forward together. They need to find a way to work together to benefit these communities because they can't do it by themselves. So that wraps up the presentation. So Kevin, over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Victor. We're now going to start our conversation with our whole panel. So Victor is going to stick around. And now we're going to ask Akilah, Sabeen, and Satonya to talk a little bit about what these findings mean for nonprofits in general, for philanthropy, and for everyone else. So welcome back, panelists. We're going to start with one of the most common questions we get on this topic, which is, like, how do we keep high trust, right? What are ways that individual nonprofits or the sector as a whole can make sure we keep this trust high?
Thank you, Kevin, for that question. And I really invite my other panelists in. But I think in terms of how do we keep it high, I think there's a couple of things that I would want to put out here. One is it's transparency. I think that is what helps to build trust, is making sure that we are transparent about our operations, our programs, our decision making. And I think we have mechanisms already in place that talks about our transparency. So I think we should just continue to strengthen those. I think the other thing that helps to continue to build trust is giving Americans a way to participate with their local nonprofits. I definitely feel proximity, access, and I feel that trust happens through doing with folks. And volunteerism is one of the major ways that nonprofits have as a tool to engage everyday Americans. And I think it's an important tool because I know it helps to strengthen trust. It helps to give Americans an opportunity to participate in their own communities. So I think we need to continue to do those things. And I invite my other panelists to weigh in.
I would absolutely agree with you, Akilah, on the transparency and proximity. I would also add that I think now, especially with the transfer of wealth taking place, that it's really important to clearly articulate the impact nonprofits are having, not just relaying the stories and the great work that they do. Proactive storytelling is critical, but also the return on investment, the impact in their communities, and also what they're contributing to their local communities, their economic impact, their contribution to their local communities, because that shows that they are delivering a service, they're contributing to their local community, and are building up their communities. They are seen as the backbone of civil society already. They are delivering services and bridging between government, business, and the public. And now I think we're adding another onus of now you also have to get really good on the deliverables, and not just with your donors, but everyday individuals as well. With the decline of media, it is up to each and every organization to do that work that, they don't have the luxury of every paper covering them, every radio host honoring them. They have to do the work and figure out ways to spread their impact across their communities.
I would plus one both all of what you're saying. I think transparency is also the reason why trust falls, right? Now we have more access than we ever have to go and see what a foundation is doing or what a nonprofit is doing. And all of our organizations, like independent sector, believe in principled right? For us, it's principled grant making practices. And that includes a level of communication and transparency around your operations. How are you doing what you do? Because we believe that those practices matter. But I think in addition, I think trust stays high when you do what you said you were going to do. Peak as a nonprofit has said to our members and to the sector, here's what we're focusing on. And we need to stay focused on that. I think the inclusion of volunteers, to Sabeen's point, is so important. The other thing is our client is foundations, and we are always encouraging foundations to make sure that they stay comfortable with contribution, and let the nonprofits and the staff who do this amazing work, let them shine and let their stories of impact shine through their lens. And I do think that when I see examples of foundations that are really making sure the stories of people in community and the nonprofits they fund shine through, that really, you can see an immediate impact in communities when that's the spotlight, is that the nonprofits are really staying true to that impact, right, that they said that they would have. I think that also trust stays high when we stay in the middle. As an individual, we are nonpartisan, right? We are philanthropy and nonprofits. If we want to be a good partner at peak grant making to community, we have to understand we don't get to pick our client, but we think we have something to offer. We think we have resources and perspectives, and we see foundations and nonprofits doing amazing things. the least we can do is amplify those stories and the people that are doing it. And that's what we try to do. But we do it from a neutral position, accepting our client as we find them, and then elevating what is good and what is right, what is just, and what is equitable.
Thanks so much. Satonya, I think you'll probably be the first one to weigh in on my next question, which is philanthropy focused. So over the 6 years of this study, one of the most consistent findings is that the public has less trust in philanthropy than it has in nonprofits. But charitable sector nonprofits can't operate without philanthropy. And so does that gap in trust between nonprofits and philanthropy motivate the trust-based philanthropy movement? And what can we do to shift perception of philanthropy? So I definitely want to hear from everyone on the panel, but I think we'll start with Satonya on this one.
Let me go back to the fact that practices matter. It isn't so important that nonprofits feel good on the other side of their interactions with a foundation. I live here in Baltimore and work a lot with local foundations here, as well as those in the DMV. When I think about, I always say, at the end of a grant transaction or a conversation with anyone on a foundation staff, when the door closes, how do those individuals feel? Because how they feel will then get told to the other staffs and in community. They will accept your money because we need the money to operate and do the good work to make sure the kids have the book bag so the kids can be safe, or whatever your subject matter is. We do need that. But we also need to be seen as individuals, and we need to feel good on the other side. So one of the things that I think that wanes at time is that people say, well, I'm giving away money. Isn't that what I'm giving it away? Yeah, but we heard from you 8 months ago that we were getting money and we haven't gotten it yet. And no one's telling us anything. And at the same time, I'm having to make all of these trade-offs internally as an organization. And so it makes trust dip, because I don't know what that nonprofit would say other than be honest. Like, the money isn't coming to us. Like, we're getting lip service, but we're not getting the real support or the thought leadership that we requested. And so what I would like for people to know is that we're in it together. I always say that foundations and nonprofits need to be better partners. There is no taker, there is no seeker, there is no giver. It's really like our reputations rise and fall together. And I just believe that the more we think about how we're operating and the story that we're telling through our practices to nonprofits and the communities they serve, how we don't take credit as a foundation. I used to work for many funding organizations. Like, we can only contribute but so much of a percentage to an organization's overall operations. It's a contribution, right? We cannot fund the whole thing. And so really sitting in partnership with other funders, other individuals who are contributing to that nonprofit, we have to do better at being in partnership and being contributors to a cause, and understanding that there is no us and them, that we are in this together and our reputations rise and fall together. Thank you.
Please.
Go ahead, Akilah.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to just add to that, thank you, Satonya, for that. I think one of the challenges, and I actually think it's inherent to how we've sort of structured philanthropy in this country, is proximity, right? Like, when Americans are proximate, they're able to get to know people, they're able to build a history of trust with them, test that history over time. And I think traditionally how philanthropy has been organized in this country is that they have been a bit removed from the general public. Partly because, I think we've structured philanthropy as being very quiet, doing, just, doing the work as opposed to talking about doing the work. And there isn't a lot of ways in which everyday Americans can necessarily build relationships or sort of volunteer at foundations, right? So the mechanism isn't there for Americans to get more exposure to that. So I think that they're just and that's fundamental. That is sort of the way we've sort of set up the operations. Nonprofits are the front-facing part of civil society. And so when Americans are struggling with the social safety net part of their lives, they know, oh, I got to call the local food bank, or oh, my child needs to learn how to swim, it's summertime, let me take them down to the Y, right? So I think that there is they're there, they're present, and foundations aren't in the same way. And because of that, I do think we may see a rift or a gap in trust, and we don't experience that with nonprofits. So
I think the other piece also is the average person fundamentally does not understand nonprofit finances, nonprofit budgets, and assumes that, to your point, Satonya, a grant covers the whole organization, which is just not true. We know as practitioners that there should be a diversification of your revenue for sustainability, for growth, for scaling, all of the above. And there is a general misconception around what it means to run a nonprofit and how that comes. I think one of the facts that you gave, Victor, was from one of the quotes that, when they have money, they line their pockets. And so there's a misconception around how does that organizational's finances work. And then as a nonprofit state association, I will say from the nonprofit side, there's absolutely a perception of an imbalance, whether that's intentional or unintentional. I think we can all agree that there still is one. And the conversation is not new. I mean, in this moment in time, I have partners who are asking, where is philanthropy? There is an expectation for you to be loud, to be visible, which is not often possible. And I understand that nuance because of public policy. You can't always do that, but that doesn't mean that the work is happening. And I think there's a shift in how we all expect what it means to show up in this moment in time because of media, because of all of the, different apps available. Everybody expects everything in here and now right away. And we can't do that. So much of this requires a lot of self-control, a lot of strategic visioning, and a lot of collaboration and behind the scenes work, which causes unrest, which causes folks to wonder, like, what is happening? And that requires so much trust to know that the work is happening. Just because we're not talking about it doesn't mean it's not. And that's nuanced. But then, from an applicational, operational side, I would still love more of philanthropy to do multi-year grants, unrestricted funding, trust the organization that you clearly have a relationship with to do the work and not have so much red tape because there's so many other things to worry about. And I think that is something that comes up time and time again. And I would not be a good nonprofit partner if I didn't say that out loud.
And so many people lean into the resources that nonprofits like ours provide, but never contribute to our bottom line. And that is not a criticism, it's a fact. And we want the sector to be better based on the hard work that our organizations are doing. But it is interesting to me that there's not always a correlation that, wow, I'm at everything that IS does, everything. And they've never made $100 even contribution to IS. That's interesting to me. I find it intriguing. But I think your point about us needing to make statements, I think so many of us are just trying to do the thing. We don't need to talk about it. I'm actually too busy to talk about it. We're trying to do the thing. And so it's about aligning with expectations to Kevin's question. I think sometimes our actions, we're doing all the things, but because we're not making a statement before we do the things, it's not always seen. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, thanks all for that one. I think one of the themes that came out of this year's study that, again, is distinct because we asked more detailed questions on these topics than we have in previous years was on these perceptions around relationship with government and funding from high net worth donors. And so, again, thanks to the qual boards that Victor mentioned, right, we can see that there's concern about the independence of nonprofits from powerful interests, either our funders or from the government. So what can nonprofits and philanthropies do to reassure people that funding doesn't equal control? And here I would toss this to really any of the panelists, since I feel like you all have insights on that nexus of funding and operations and governance.
I'm happy to start. I think it's important to leverage the values of good governance that were already referenced in their understanding of how the sector operates. We, as the sector, are bound by state and federal laws around conflicts of interest, around ethical fundraising practices. And I think sharing more about what that is actually by definition and what it entails is important, so that they know that there are checks and balances in place. There's already very rigorous federal scrutiny about how contracts can be administered, what can be done with them. And ultimately, we all have boards of directors, and they are fiduciary responsible for the organization to prevent undue influence, to review, funding conflicts, things of that nature, and to really ensure that we are not chasing dollars and, having a mission creep of doing something else because we're, trying to get the funding, but focusing again on our mission and our work and following the rules of engagement, and ultimately always staying in compliance. That's the thing that keeps me up at night. One nonprofit that is not compliant makes the entire sector look like we all operate in that way. And that is why we care deeply about ensuring that every nonprofit sector knows what their guardrails are, what the definitions of those guardrails are, so nobody could say, I didn't know. And to really make all of those resources as accessible as possible, so it's also not something that is unavailable to small, mid, large, whatever the size and scope of that organization is.
Mhm. I would lean in that, like, so many people in the peak ecosystem, we are the ones who are holding compliance and other responsibilities. And I am so proud of watching the peak team and so many of the individuals, right? The individuals that work at foundations, right? Foundations are not these things. People work there. And when you look at how they're going into community, to your very point, Sabeen, when I think about the more than 400 volunteers that are part of Peak's ecosystem, right? But I see them in their communities because they know about 501c3, they know about conflict of interest, they know what the risk environment is, and to see them out volunteering. Peak is a large organization. We are one of the 5% of larger organizations, but the average is about 250 to 500,000 is the average nonprofit, about 3 to 5 staff, maybe paid. And I have been so proud to watch my team, as much as they work for Peak, go out and say, because of what we do at Peak, we know things that these nonprofits have to hear. And they're going and talking to organizations like Catch a Fire and Taproot and volunteering themselves. And I've always said that, understanding the grant making life cycle and all the IRS stuff, it's a superpower. But so many nonprofits don't have that expertise and the people that are doing the thing. So I also love the fact that the more we know and understand keeping our own environments compliant, understanding that there are management responsibilities and there are board responsibilities. We don't often do that training to the public to understand how we meet our tests each year. Maybe we need to. I don't know who does that, but maybe we need to. But I do see a lot of people taking our knowledge that we've learned in philanthropy and going out into community. And that I find to be a beautiful thing and not often spoken about.
I just want to add, I think my panelists nailed it. So I'll say a couple of things about this. One is that it is important for nonprofit leaders to be very clear about this point about undue influence. We live in a world, and I'm a sociologist, so I'm always thinking about the context in which we exist in. We live in a world where people think they can commodify everything. So that number that came up in our survey around this did not surprise me, because in almost every other facet of our lives, money can buy almost everything, right? And this is one of the few places in American society where that's not the case, right? That if you show up and are a donor, and this is the other thing, donors come in all sizes with nonprofits, right? The average donor in America isn't a billionaire, right? They are a working class, everyday American that wants to give to a cause that is near and dear to their heart. And so it's important for us to understand who gets to call themselves a philanthropist, right? Or a funder. But I also think it's important that nonprofit leaders, again, are just really clear about this and have to restate, amplify, foot stomp it to anybody that wants to engage with them around the values and principles we have as a sector. And one of the things that we've done at independent sector was to create the 33 principles of good governance and ethical practice for this reason in particular. They are principles, guiding posts for nonprofit leaders to be able to articulate, like Sabeen did, about compliance, right? And not just it's about compliance, and it's about our sort of moral standing. That this, for boards, it's one vote. For funders, the role that they have as it relates to participating in the organization, like just being very explicit and clear about roles, about power, about how we engage, I think is going to be really, really important. But again, I'm not surprised by this number. I do think that the sector has something to teach America about not having to commodify everything. And I think this is something we should absolutely talk about and lead on.
Thanks so much for that. I want to start transitioning to more audience questions. So again, we are looking at your questions as they come in. I'm going to ask one now, and I'm going to tie it back to another topic that is a current event topic. So we got a question: how do we alleviate the potential erosion of trust within the current political landscape? And I want to highlight that the current political landscape also includes threats to the Johnson Amendment, which, for those who don't follow the nuance of nonprofit regulation, is the federal law that says that nonprofit organizations can't endorse political candidates. That's something nonprofits are not allowed to do. Nonprofits can talk to policymakers, but nonprofits can't go on the record supporting someone in an election. That's the Johnson Amendment. With that question from the audience on avoiding potential erosion of trust in a divided political landscape, is how we keep trust high changing in the current political landscape? And is it at risk with the Johnson Amendment under threat from various sides of the aisle that want to see that rule go away?
Kevin, if I could just briefly jump in, we have a data point in our survey that it wasn't included in this briefer presentation. It is in the full report that 41% of Americans say that they would be less likely to trust the entire nonprofit sector if the Johnson Amendment was weakened or repealed. So this is a significant threat. There was some news recently about the Trump administration wanting churches to be able to endorse political candidates. I would say my recommendation to him would be not to do that, because I think it may help them, their individual nonprofit or church in the short run, but it's going to harm everyone in the long run.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Victor. And that is our recommendation at independent sector, is not to get rid of the Johnson Amendment. We do see this as a very slippery slope, even for faith-based institutions like churches. We never want to get to a place where people are attaching funding to the political leanings of a nonprofit, right? We never want to get to that place. And so that is part of the reason why we want to really preserve the Johnson Amendment. So, Kevin, to your question, I just say in this time where we're at, I think transparency is really important. Again, I think the other thing is focusing on competency, right? People come to the sector to get their needs met. We need to make sure people are getting their needs met. So making sure that the services that we're delivering to the American people are of high quality. Satonya brought this up. People feel good when they come and receive services from us. So I think all those things that are going to be really important now. I do think it's going to be important for the sector to come together and be aligned with what are the things we want to advocate for as it relates to the White House or on Capitol Hill. We did that with the budget, with the congressional budget that just came out early July. I mean, I think the sector really aligned around a lot of really good policy. We did not get a lot of what we advocated for, but we did get some of what we advocated for. And I think that's just the power of the sector working together. So I think it's going to be really important for us moving forward in this moment to do that.
If I could add one thing there, I think there's also an internal component here with our staff and our teams. There is so much unrest with all the uncertainty, and there is a tension of generations around, react now, respond now, speak up louder, versus calm, steady, and follow through on what is the greater good that we're trying to accomplish, which really behooves us to, as leaders of organizations, to really have these conversations with our staff, to create a safe space to have this, so that they're not having it publicly in front of clients, in front of stakeholders, because that also erodes the trust. If they see a team member of ours, very directly expressing their opinion, whether approve or disapprove of whomever is in elected office, that reflects on the organization as a whole. And so this is a different time. And I think it's important for us to really think through how to make sure our teams have a safe place, they feel trusted by their leaders, but also know how to navigate when to speak up and who has that authority to speak up, and when you're representing an organization and when you're representing yourself as an individual. And a lot of that matters in this moment in time as well.
And we know also so much of the lens of like who we are. You put our 3 organizations aside. So many people, when they think nonprofit, they're thinking about the direct service organization in the community, right? That is like during the pandemic, when, Victor, to your point, when we saw it falling, that 19 to 21 period, one of the things that you said when you were helping us understand the findings before the presentation was that people lost their job, and then they knocked on the door at the homeless shelter, and they didn't have a bed for the family. And people said, I can't believe it. It's so hard to ask for help, right? We know this as individuals. When people ask for help at some points, especially early on in the pandemic, they couldn't get help. Some of us couldn't even get in to get our vaccine, right? It was a long line. Maybe you lost your job. In Baltimore, we had a couple of big closures of plants. Those things have been planned way before. We knew about it as a community, but that happened right at the pandemic. So people are showing up at the food bank, and the line is literally 3 blocks long. By the time the people got to the door, they didn't have food. And yeah, it was a level of disappointment, but it was desperation when people needed something and they did the difficult thing of asking for help. Not all nonprofits were able to help them, and it made trust fall. I found that to be such an interesting moment. And I remember digging in just as a person. But I think that narrative storytelling is so important for what we do. When I was a case manager after I left law school and didn't go work for a firm, but actually went out into community, when my nonprofit sent me into community, when a family needed me, I didn't ask them about their political party. I didn't ask them how they voted. My job was to listen and to ask them what they needed, and to find the way for me and our community collectively to meet those needs over 3 to 5 years so they could get to stability. That's a long-term engagement. We didn't talk about how people were voting. And when I go to church, the only time I've ever walked out of a church is when the person that was behind the pulpit started talking about politics, because my parents raised me to sit there and be quiet and be respectful. But you know what? I went there for my spirituality. I didn't go there for that other thing. And so religious institutions and other have to remember that they too have seen less people coming in the door. And I know I'm moving, but it's like, look, trust is trust. And a lot of religious institutions have 501c3s, not all. Not all churches have that. They go and they earn it because they have proven that they are helping beyond their parishioner. They are actually there for community, and they earn their 501c3, but you can lose your 501c3 too. So this just has to be about remembering that we're here to help. I try to help philanthropy and really see the individuals that work in philanthropy and give wind at their back, right? Because they will be the change agents for good. In the end, they will help their institutions see differently. So my job is to put wind at their back. And when I was in community, it was to help. I didn't say anything about anybody's voting. And it's sad to see that the organizations, particularly here in my backyard, to hear anyone vilifying nonprofits, knowing how great they have shown up in this community. I've been here for 25 years in Baltimore. I've seen amazing things. It hurts my heart. And I think that this is Hearts and Minds work. I hope people remember that we are here to do good. and to do right, and it's not always easy. And that the politics piece, this is not going to get us anywhere. And every 4 years, there's shifts, there's changes. Every 2 years, there's shifts and changes. So we also have to Sabeen's point, stay the course.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Satonya. And I think we're coming up toward the end of the hour, so I want to ask one last question that is sort of the flip of a lot of what we've been talking about. We've been talking a lot about how we maintain trust and build trust. One of the Zoom poll questions we got was about how do we turn trust in philanthropy and nonprofits into positive gains? What do we do with trust? What does trust allow us to do? And I think, you know, as a researcher, I want to ask also, like, how do you use these findings today? But, you know, I think, so the question is just generally like, how do we turn research to action, and how do we turn trust to gains, right? To making the sector more effective, to helping us achieve our missions. What do we do with trust?
I think we have like a peak independent sector. So many of us PSOs, we talk about philanthropy, supporting, strengthening, mobilizing organizations like ours. The data is used for decision making. I will be pointing back to this study and the findings in a lot of things that I talk about. I will be trying to draw attention to the fact that we just don't, at peak, us, the staff and board, we don't make decisions willy-nilly. We have amazing data, and we do have to rely on that data for decision making. I think it's important for us to keep saying that and to keep doing that and showing that. But I think, again, this is hearts and minds work. I do believe that we have to avoid mission creep, stay true to our cause, keep showing impact, and just keep showing up for each other and for community. And you know what? I don't think we have to sit around. We shouldn't sit around wondering whether people keep trusting us. I think we have to keep doing, to Sabeen's point earlier. And we have to make sure that we do it with fidelity, with morals, and with strong ethics, right? Over and over every day. We have got to pick doing the right thing and being change agents for good.
Go ahead.
So I was just going to add, trust allows us to engage with the American public. You know, Victor started out by saying this is a nationally represented sample. And so that gives me a really good indication that at least 57% of Americans feel very good about their local nonprofits. And I know we don't have 57% of Americans volunteering. So giving Americans an opportunity to engage, to volunteer, trust is the on-ramp. And so that is what we can do with it. More volunteers leads to not only just more human capital, and we need it now, especially as our sector is, you know, going through a bit of shedding of jobs because of the federal retrenchment of funding. That we're going to need volunteers more. We're going to need them to serve on our board, and we're going to need them as donors. And so this trust report gives us an on-ramp to all that wonderful stuff that comes after it. But we have to use trust as a way to get people in the door and engaged.
Yeah, and I would just add, you know, first and foremost, the obvious is to protect it relentlessly because it's easy to lose in a snap. And I think also really using that trust to take our credibility to speak on behalf of communities and leveraging that for advocacy when needed, when it aligns with our mission and our public policy work. But I think that's really important. Also and remember that it's not transactional. It's based on relationships and communities and stakeholders, and to maintain those feedback mechanisms and not to forget that. And I think also to challenge for systems change as necessary. And I think that goes back to, we don't have to be partisan, but we can also be honest with factual data around what does need to shift. And that is where we leverage our voice, whether it's as a state association for me or as PSOs for Satonya or Akilah, but it's really important to do that. And I, as a state association, have just been so proud to see that work happening at the national level between independent sector, between United Philanthropy Forum, National Council of Nonprofits. And I think that's fantastic. That's exactly what we should be doing with that trust. And, you know, we're going to need a lot more of it.
Thank you, Sabeen, for that.
Akilah, you came off mute, and that's perfect timing. We have a couple minutes left. Do you have a few words to say to close us out in terms of where we go from here and what we, again, what we do with trust, what we do with these findings?
So thank you very much. First of all, I just want to thank Victor for your incredible research. Thank you so much, Victor, for helping us lead this work. Kevin, thank you and the team for helping to administer and helping us have this conversation today. And I'd like to also thank my other co-panelists, Satonya and Sabeen, for having, I feel like, an illuminating conversation on trust. Please, everyone, if you haven't, I would encourage you to download the new Trust in Nonprofits and Philanthropy report. It is free on our website. If you're not a member, I encourage you to join Independent Sector. We are still fighting to defend the sector, and your membership helps in that. And then finally, love to see everybody in Atlanta this October, the 27th through the 29th, for the Independent Sector National Summit, when we'll have an opportunity to go deeper in all of these issues that we talked about today. So with that, I want to just say thank you all for joining us. This has been an incredible conversation, and we want you all to weigh in and help us further figure out how we can continue to use the incredible social capital we have right now, which is trust. So Kevin, with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
So thank you again all for coming, and we hope to see you at future events.